One of the top recruits in the class of 2026, a top 100 recruit too, chose BYU over Utah. How concerning is this? We're going to discuss on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts as well as on YouTube. If it's your first time listening to this show, make sure you like and subscribe. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create the account, use code LOCKEDONCALL. It's all caps, no spaces for $20 off your first purchase. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined on today's show by Utah rivals Matt Patton to talk about a disappointing outcome to a guy we've been talking about for a while. Brock Harris has been a name, I think it was years ago we talked about Brock Harris. He was one of 5 players when the initial 2026 national rankings came out, one of 4 players to be ranked inside the top 100. So we were excited that, hey, Utah might have a chance to land one of those top guys. And if he went somewhere else, it wasn't going to hurt as much because you figured it would be SEC school, Big Ten school. But instead he lands at BYU, not just a Big 12 rival, but your direct rival. So, yeah, the fact that one of the best players in your state picked BYU over you, it definitely hurts, Matt.
Yeah, it's not a good trend that we're seeing right now for Utah. The hard part about it is the NIL factor, not knowing if that's the reason. Or, he might have picked BYU all along. I look at it and I think, his dad was a pitcher there. Mm-hmm. He's, obviously he's a member of the church.
Will be serving a mission.
Finding a serve a mission. So all those things are kind of what BYU would have gotten in the past. The fact that he's a 4-star is where it hurts, and especially, top 50, I think.
If you're doing national rating, he's 56. If you're doing the player rating, all this is according to 24/7 Sports, he's 67.
Okay. So top 60, top 75. That's a big. It hurts, and especially knowing Utah got him in for a visit, they got their opportunity. And they couldn't bring him in. But again, it's just hard to say. Is it NIL? Or is it the fact that maybe he was planning to go to BYU his whole life?
Mm-hmm. I heard late last week it was not trending in a positive direction for Utah, but they still had a chance. And obviously, they always see him going to Cougars. 5th tight end nationally, 2nd-ranked player in the state of Utah, only behind Celestine Moe on the player rating. But if you do the composite ranking, he's the top player overall. And Harris is, he's 6'6" tight end who can move like that, a catch radius. I think that's what also makes this hurt, right, Matt? Is like Utah's known for consistently producing good tight ends. Like, and I know Carson Ryan ends up going to BYU too. So now you've lost on 2 tight ends. We're actually going to talk about the tight ends at the end of the show because they are looking really promising so far too. And we'll, second segment, want to hit on some of these recruiting trends we're seeing where top recruits are choosing BYU a lot over Utah, especially the in-state guys just right now. But going back to this, it hurts because it's a tight end. And you're like, hey, we have Dalton Kincaid, we have Grant Keith. Look at how highly these guys produced at this level. And instead, you're more of a believer, NIL, whatever it may be. You choose BYU over us, despite us having a better recent history at the position. And once again, it stings, Matt.
Well, and it's hard because BYU, they are now in the Big 12. So in that regard, they're equal. I would have thought that these types of things would take a little longer to happen, and maybe they will. This could be a one-off, like I was saying before, just because BYU has not proven that they can put players in the NFL at the level that Utah has. And so I thought it would take a little more time, but they've got a lot going for them right now. Utah's a little bit on a down. Just they've had a couple of rough years due to injuries. While BYU has had a really nice year, they've got some stability now showing at the coaches at all levels. And maybe that had a factor too. Well, Utah's kind of got that. How long is Whittingham going to stick around? How much is the coaching staff going to change? It's a new offensive coordinator. So there's a lot of things that can play into that.
There's a lot of things too. And BYU, yes, their NIL success has something to do with their NIL, the amount of NIL resources they have. We just saw them. I think reports are they've landed the guard out of Baylor for $3.5 million.
Yeah, 3.5.
Bonsa somewhere between 5 to 7. I've seen varying reports. Like, we know their pockets go deep for basketball and for football too. They landed some really good transfers. They kept some good players too. So we know BYU's pockets roll deep, but that doesn't change the fact. And we're going to talk about one guy who specifically said in the second segment that he always wanted to go to BYU, but didn't feel like their program was at a level at the time he made his commitment. Now it feels like they're at their level and decided to go to them. I do feel like BYU having such a strong season where they finish as a top 20 team nationally, if not for tiebreakers, they're in the Big 12 championship game. They're arguably the second best team in the conference last year when you look at how everything ended up playing out. The fact that BYU succeeding is definitely a part of this. It's not just NIL related. It is partially too because the Cougars had success last year.
Yeah, I don't know who said it. I don't know if it was Whittingham, but somebody said winning fixes everything. And I think it's true. It does.
It does. It does in so
Nothing hurts.
Yeah, it is. It's a rival too, and you have a chance to, hey, if Utah beat them, they would still have something to say over them, but unfortunately they didn't, so that's what also makes it tougher too. What's nice is Utah does still have a chance to land some of the top guys in the class. Celeste Mo is going to make his visits to Utah. I do Matt Patton is a guy that Utah's still in on. He was committed to Oregon as a defensive end. Now wants to be an offensive tackle. Thinks that's his best chance to
reach. That's an interesting one.
And the nice thing that Utah is going to continue to offer, especially for the highest level of recruits, the 4 stars and some of those guys, like, hey, if you go to Top Dog, and BYU's not in this, so that's where this becomes a competition for them. But if you go to Oregon, like Matt Patton was going to, you're not going to play as an offensive tackle right away. There's too many guys there that are going to get on the field right away. If you come to Utah, a la Spencer Fano, and I'm not saying Matt Patton is going to be Spencer Fano, but what does Spencer Fano do? High recruit, played right away. That's what Matt Patton has a chance to be. And that's where Utah, even though some of these other schools are going to have NIL advantages on Utah, what Utah can offer you is elite development. So maybe right away at the collegiate level, you're not making as much had you gone to big school, but you are maximizing your potential so that when the time comes for the NFL draft where you get that long-term contract, you are the best player you can be.
Yeah. It surprises me how poorly some of these, blue blood type top schools develop their players. I don't know if it's as much of a concern for them just because they have so many. And just for fun, I was going through and looking at the top recruit classes over the last 3 or 4 years. And it was shocking to me how many of the names that were these big 5-star guys that I don't even remember, and there's so many guys that don't pan out, but it does seem like if Utah gets one, and they have some that don't work out, but if Utah gets one and it was kind of from the beginning, they almost always do well. They're higher 4-star type guys. Almost all of them make it to the NFL. I'd have to do, some percentages and things, but I think if you were to look at it, Utah, when they get a good player, they make it.
Like recent ones that stand out to me, Spencer Fano working out very well. Clark Phillips made it to the NFL. Jalen Johnson, one of the best corners in the NFL too. And I feel like there's another guy I'm forgetting. But Caleb Loman was right up there as well. He feels like he's on his way to being a future NFL offensive lineman. So Utah does have a history of, hey, when they hit on a big-time recruit, a big-time player, usually said player goes on to achieve NFL success. That's another thing Utah has. Right. You mentioned earlier, Matt, Utah still at the time we're recording this, over the last 10 years, they have the most success amongst Big 12 teams of putting individuals into the NFL, having those guys get drafted. They're going to have several guys get drafted yet again this year. And that is something that is a major accomplishment for the University of Utah's player development system. That's still intact too. And you look at Utah's roster, I like what they have all over the place. Could they fall short? Of course, we saw them fall short last year due to injury in large part. But there are a lot of positive things and pieces this Utah team is going, and major reasons to think they can bounce back. And one thing that they're going to try to do is bounce back a little bit in the recruiting trail, because there is a concerning trend that's kind of going on between BYU and Utah that we're going to talk about in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. There's nothing like the energy of a live game, whether it's catching last-minute MLB showdown or soaking up the excitement of an NBA matchup. But finding great seats at a great price, now that's a challenge. Until I found Game Time. Game Time makes scoring last-minute tickets easier than ever. Prices actually drop as you get closer to the event, and with their all-in pricing, you see the total cost upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Here's what I love about Game Time. They make you a priority. They're last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute for sports, concert, comedy, and theater events, too. You can also grab last-minute seats for the Utah Jazz game, Utah Hockey Club game, and save big with their zone deals. They also offer that peace of mind with seat views before you buy, so you know what kind of view you're going to get. No surprise fees at checkout. How annoying are those? Every time you log on, you see a surprise fee late. You're like, wait, this isn't the price. Not with Game Time. No surprise fees. Also, their lowest price guarantee. You can book with total confidence. Their low price guarantee means I never worry about overpaying. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCalls. That's all caps, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. All caps, no spaces, one word, Locked On College. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed with Game Time. Matt Patton back with me here. Matt, I'm a little concerned by a trend that's been going on. What trend am I talking about? Well, Utah on June 23, 2024, landed Cyrus Polu, the linebacker out of Desert Hills, who would, I think at the time might have been 3-star, but wound up being a 4-star. That was a good get for Utah. That was their one 4-star recruit they got in the last class. Kristen Thatcher was at a time. He dropped to a 3-star. So either way, you can argue Thatcher right up there as well, too. And Thatcher a good player. But I especially want to focus in on the in-state talent. And Harris is the latest one to end up at BYU. And it's not just Harris. Especially some of these recent players are choosing the Cougars over Utah. Recent success plays a role in that. NIL does too. There's lots of reasons. But just to name a couple, we just saw Juice is his nickname is a few weeks ago, the pass rusher out of Westlake. He enters the portal. He was committed to Stanford. They move on from Troy Taylor. Right away, he goes to BYU. That's still a 4-star recruit. I'd like to have him at Utah. Then you have guys like Tassili Akana, who at one point was the top player in the class of 2023. What does he do? Goes to Texas, doesn't pan out. He comes back to BYU. Oh, that was still a really highly coveted recruit, really talented player, high recruit. He's come back. He's going to BYU. How about one who was directly committed to Utah? Hunter Clegg. What does Hunter Clegg do? He goes to BYU. And that's a lot of guys there I just mentioned. High recruits, 4-star players from the state of Utah, and a lot of them picking BYU. In the NIL era, where we're seeing the Cougars dish out NIL deals larger than what Utah is currently offering, paired with the fact that they're having success right now too. And the NIL maybe is the biggest thing because we just see the difference in just teams who have stronger NIL funds and some don't. Matt, I am concerned by this recruiting trend. I don't think it's nothing what's going on right now.
Yeah, you should be concerned. I think most fans are concerned, especially when you also consider how they're losing their own players. Yeah, we talked about this plenty in the past, but Tanavasa, Ryan, that just didn't happen much in the past. You'd have maybe one guy slip over there every now and then, and there were some, unusual circumstances behind it. But to have 2 starter level players, move on over. And it makes you question a little bit about what's going on with the culture there.
At BYU or Utah?
At Utah.
Okay.
Well, both. Actually, that's a good point. Maybe the culture is, because a lot of the players are talking about how the culture is kind of fun at BYU, and so if they're looking to have a little more fun and have a coach that's probably a little bit more laid back at times than Kyle Whittingham is, then that is, the culture could be a difference maker. It also could be that with the change of conferences, Utah is redirecting their recruiting efforts. We know that they're trying to hit Texas really hard. They may not be as concerned about the Utah recruits.
And I know that Utah, what were we saying, Matt?
No, I just think you can see that they're putting a lot into Texas, and they might find that there's certain players that they'd rather make a harder push for or put the money into. Or they might be waiting more for NIL opportunities, like a Dampier, like so many of these others that they brought in that should be immediate impact players. It's hard to say if it's if it's the transfer focus, but like you said before too, they're still getting some guys that were in-state guys, like at Texas, at Washington, at all these different places. Yeah.
And it sucks. And I know Utah ranks higher than BYU with their current recruiting class. I know that, but I'm looking at the top guys, the elite level players. And I like a lot of the guys that Utah's bringing in. I think they're going to be good players. But I loved Hunter Clegg. I was really excited when Utah got him. I thought Tassili Akana was a really good player. Thought that was a loss when he left the state. Same thing with Juice out of Westlake. That's a really good player. Oh, he's going out of state, but at least he's not coming to Utah. Nope. But now he's going to the rival. That's where it hurts. And that's where it becomes concerning. You just mentioned Tanuvasa too. Another one where he was going to be a starter. Carson Ryan too. Yes, Utah landed Logan Fano a couple years ago, but Fano was a guy who wasn't really panning out at BYU, had the injury, of course, as well too. So it's different than a BYU starter who produced at a high level than saying, no, I'm not going to be on the Cougars anymore. I'm going to Utah now. So those are the concerning trends too. Does roster, transfer, makeup, all those things have to do with it? Yes, but the way that BYU, when these guys, when you leave the state, if it doesn't work out, a lot of players, when that happens across the country, usually return to their home state. And it's nice when they go to your program, especially when they have that former elite potential. Instead, they're choosing BYU. And I don't like that right now, Matt.
Yeah, but again, I think what's going to change it is just one good year again from Utah. Just another year to say, hey, look what we can do when we're healthy. And I think once they can prove that, but I don't know, it may not, it might be a fight from now on because they are on that equal plane. I think it always hurt BYU when they were an independent.
Are they on an equal plane with NIL?
With NIL, no, they're not.
That's what's concerning to me. Like Utah can absolutely beat BYU on any given year, but is it going to be an upset? It might be moving forward just because of the NIL differential. That's where you're going to be hurt. I mean, look at what Texas Tech is doing. The level of players that Texas Tech is bringing in is not indicative of their football success last year. They were nowhere near the Big 12 championship game, and they brought in the third best portal class in the country because of those NIL resources. So therefore, if you have a down year in some instances, if you have the ability to bring in elite players and elite guys, that's going to matter less. And that's where what Utah's done such a good job of is recruiting and developing. And they can still do that and still be really good at that. But I think less than ever, they'll land some good players. But is Utah going to have a top 25 class again anytime soon? I mean, there was I think they're 50th or somewhere in that, like this year. Like that's probably more around where they'll be. If they have success, they can be a little bit higher, but I don't think they're going to creep back in the top 25 because of NIL. With Smith Snowden and Spencer Fano, they chose Utah. They chose for development. And those guys stayed and they love this program. And like there will be guys who continue to do that. But if you also love another program and they can give you more money, we know which one these guys are going to end up choosing.
Yeah. It doesn't always prove to work the way in football. There's still plenty of teams where it's failing. I'm not even sure it'll work for Texas Tech. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. For Colorado, it took a while to get it to work.
But Indiana turned it around right away too.
But it did. You have that, and then you have the Florida States where it completely fell apart. So it's hard to say, and I'm not sure that Utah has bought into it quite yet, and I'm not sure that Kyle Whittingham has bought into NIL quite yet. And
will he?
You kind of have to at some point.
And will he, or was that Morgan Scally going to be the one who ends up having to buy into that? That's another thing I'm very interested to see. And you mentioned culture changes. I do feel like BYU's culture changed when they brought in Jay Hill. And Utah's culture took a little bit of a hit last year with the down year with the lack of production you had on offense. It was they've mentioned how different the vibes have been in the spring, like from how things ended last season. Because winning does cure a lot. And Jay Hill shored up a lot of things that BYU does well. And Utah's offense was a mess last year, and they needed a change on it. And I'm glad they made that and have found a guy in Jason Beck who I think is going to bring a lot of positivity to Utah. And I think that I think Utah is going to be really good this year. Like Utah, to me, could absolutely beat BYU, but it is definitely concerning that, like, hey, and I know we did it with Oregon and USC for a few years, but then we reaped the benefits and had the high recruiting class because we were doing that successfully. Now you could have a good year, and I don't think you're going to reap the benefits as much because guys will still be like, oh, you had a really good year, but how much can you pay? And once again, we don't know why these guys chose the schools they chose. Brock Harris may have always loved BYU, and Hunter Clegg was the guy I referred to earlier. Hunter Clegg said he loved BYU as a program. It's where he wanted to grow. He's just over in American Fork, so it's right there too. But they weren't a good enough program at the time, he felt like. So that's why he ended up going to Stanford, and now he feels like they are. So they ended up going back there too. So I still think Utah will be fine. Utah can beat and compete with BYU any given year. But I am concerned more and more that in the NIL era, when we've seen BYU have better NIL resources, that more frequently than not, if Utah bests BYU, it could be an upset. And that to me is something that's just like, that's deflating that the Cougars have this positive momentum compared to Utah.
And it could change. There's definitely donors out there that have the money.
It's changing for basketball, it feels like, right?
Yep. You're seeing that. There's been plenty of reports saying that was a part of what brought Jensen in, knowing that there would be an increase in NIL. So if you can get that same kind of support on the football side, it's just convincing those people that have the deep pockets to put the money in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely part of it. And Utah is going to do that. They did land a 4-star. We're just 2 years removed from them landing Isaac Wilson. Ike Garcia too. So I do think this is a Utah program that will bring in some elite talent, but can they bring in the level that BYU is doing? Can they bring in the level of transfers too? That some of the guys at BYU, like Utah has guys like Tano Vossa. Instead, we see BYU being the one to land them. It'd be great if Utah was the one who was bringing guys over from BYU. So that's a part and a piece of this too worth watching and just seeing how it shakes out. The portal rivalry between Utah and BYU. We mentioned a guy in the portal, Carson Ryan, as a guy who ended up going to BYU. So how would Utah's tight end room look? Well, Matt, early reviews are pretty good right now. It feels like every practice I see the media attend to, they say Landen King made this big play. Dallin Bentley stepping up and doing something downfield. And Hunter Andrews, the linebacker, running back, basically just a jack of all trades type of player now a tight end at Utah, also producing and stepping up too. So I know originally this offense didn't use a ton of tight ends last year, but tight ends are a part of Utah in a big way. And I think this is where Jason Beck's adapting his offense, because I think all three of these guys are going to be more productive last year. And obviously Andrews didn't play the position, but I think Bentley will be better. And I definitely think Landen King's going to have more production than he did last year, man.
Yeah, I really like how it's just come together, and especially with the Hunter Andrews situation, because I was looking at it and I just thought, yeah, King, he's a good receiving tight end. And Bentley, he's definitely the blocking tight end. So I kind of like, okay, Bentley's the former Fotheringham. You got to have that. And Fotheringham's made a career out of it. He's in the NFL.
Yes,
you need that guy. But you also need the good receiver. But the thing is, with a Keithy, he could do everything. He could take the handoffs, and he could block well enough. And that's where I was kind of like, I don't see that with King. And so enter Hunter Andrews, a guy that can play linebacker, a guy that can play running back. And he's just got the speed that, when you have a guy that's that big, it's really hard to bring him down when they have the speed that he has. And so I'm really excited to see what Andrews can do.
I am too. I'm really interested to see how this tight end room shakes out in terms of the amount of snaps each guy's given. Utah's at their best when they have three tight ends. You already mentioned Bentley, the Fotheringham type of guy. It seems like he's continued to get better. And then blocker was where I thought he lacked a little bit last year, so continuing to grow there will be big. King is such a talented pass catcher. He has to be on the field. I still remember just the spring practices of him beating Smith Snowden. We saw clips of that in coverage. Like, you need to get him on the field. He should have been more productive, too, had he gotten better quarterback play. So that's another guy I think can be maximized, too. And Hunter Andrews is just a guy with immense potential and upside, too. Right now, I feel like King is going to lead that room in receiving yards right now, but you usually see Bentley being the guy who leads it in snap counts, blocking production, and who knows, Matt? Maybe Hunter Andrews is going to surprise us and be this team's top tight end next year. It feels like that's on the table.
Well, and the funny thing is, I remember when he took one handoff against Southern Utah last year. I think is that the only game he played in? I think so.
I think so. He might have.
And I mean, he just took off. It was something like a 15-yard game, and yeah, it's against SUU. And then he did fumble it at the end of the run. He just kind of left the ball. But before he fumbled, I looked at that and I just thought, oh, I want to see this guy on the field all season long. And they decided, obviously, to redshirt him. They probably weren't sure where to use him yet. But yeah, this is a guy that put up massive numbers in high school rushing. And so if he's able to they say he has good hands in spring so far. And so, yeah, if he can run the ball, you don't know what he's going to do. And that's where Utah's had so much success, is when you have a tight end that can get the ball at any point. And it's really hard to game plan for that, for the defense.
Hunter Andrews is a guy that has a chance to be an X factor for this team. But all the tight ends to me have a chance to be a big difference. When you have a quarterback like Devin Dampier who can buy time necessary, so often you see the tight ends be the biggest beneficiaries of that, because the wide receivers, in some instances, have worked themselves so far downfield that Dampier at that point, if he's really under pressure, like, might not be able to get the ball that deep downfield. It might be a riskier throw, versus if you have a tight end like you left in the block and then all of a sudden he releases, that's an easy dump off if you buy time and miss a sack too. So I do think Dampier's ability to buy time will also lead to better tight end production than we saw last year with guys like Isaac Wilson, who obviously really struggled under pressure.
Yeah, and you're right. And I think, and you mentioned Landen King earlier with this, he's probably the best that I saw last year. Not that they were able to get him the ball, but I would see him so often, find a new opening when the quarterback was under pressure, and he was open more than Wilson would like to say now, going back and looking at the video. And so, yeah, if he continues to do that, Landen King probably will be the greatest beneficiary. And I would agree, he probably will lead the tight ends in receiving yards.
I still remember the Colorado game where he was like the only one in the shot of the TV, and Wilson.
Yeah.
You're just like, no, like he has so much potential. Landon King, especially. Hunter Andrews is this enigma. We don't really know what to expect. Hopefully, we see some of him in the spring game, but who knows? Because Utah said they weren't going to play their starters a ton in the spring game either. But what we do know is that Utah has 3 tight ends that are capable of producing, that are making plays and turning heads in spring ball, and that's incredibly exciting. Just like it's always exciting when I get Matt Patton on the show. Matt, appreciate you hopping on. Please let everyone know where they can follow you at and find more of your work.
Yeah, utah.rivals.com, or you can check me out on Twitter at PattonMatt.
You're the man, Matt. Thanks again for coming on.
Yep, you bet.
That's going to do it for today's Locked On Utes. We'll be back with you tomorrow talking about the latest in Utah football and Utah athletics. Hope you'll join us then.